Hi, my name is Nikki, and this is the Interventionalist. Hi. So, I'm just gonna get right into it. I cannot stop thinking about the way that the past repeats itself, or the anxiety that comes with trying to make the right choices in your life so that the past doesn't repeat itself. The last video I made sort of talked about this, and that was the idea that you have to sort of live with who you've been in the past and reconcile with that who you are now, or reconcile that with who you are now and take it into consideration in regards to who you want to be in the future, right? And before that, I talked about attachment styles, which also has to do with this because it affects your now and it affects your future, and it is a personification of your past that doesn't die. But today, I guess, I've been thinking so much about the responsibility that comes with the present, and that is built upon past experiences, and that is anticipating the future. And I guess what came to mind was cognitive dissonance. And that had me thinking about a few different existential, philosophy concepts, but just to start, cognitive dissonance is when you're aware of something but you behave differently. And I feel like everyone has those experiences. Like, you can be totally aware that eating a shit ton of food is going to make you feel sick the next day, but you do it anyways. And it's for different reasons. I mean, addicts go through this all the time. If you have an addiction to anything, whether it's your phone, alcohol, anything, you're going to repeat it. You keep repeating it, even if you're aware of the negative consequences or that you want to change. Or if you bring it back to attachment styles, you can have self-awareness about your attachment style, right? If you're anxious, avoidant, or a mix of both. But it doesn't stop your body from holding on to those memories. And memories become instincts. Like, if you have developed over time, for example, an attachment style, or you've learned a lesson in the past that doing this one thing hurts or doing something else feels good, that memory lives inside of you, and it helps guide, and it will direct your life, and it influences your future. And it can keep us making bad decisions, or making the decisions we don't want to make anymore, or making good decisions, like building habit, right? It comes down to building habit, but habit isn't a lot of times when you look up breaking a habit, right? Whether it's a behavior or a thought pattern, or it comes up, the internet will say 28 days, really hold strong, mind over matter, think about it more than you act on it, or think before you act on it. And it's just not that simple, because when something takes hold of you internally, an experience and a memory, the way your body holds on to it, suddenly it just sort of infiltrates your mind, and it can be buzzing around in your head, and it's not so easy to clear it up, to get through that haze and make the decision that you want to make, or the one you need to make but your body wants to make, and then your body's also saying you need to make this decision. Or if it comes down to relationships, knowing that if someone is treating you badly, you need to leave, and you want to leave. In your mind, you're telling yourself this stuff, but your body is a separate being. It also wants and needs to stay in its own fucked up way. I think a lot about the mind-body problem in philosophy, which just means that we don't understand where they connect. There's really no science that can tell you. You can't see your thoughts in your brain. You can maybe see where certain neurons are firing off when you are having a kind of emotion that is coming with a certain kind of thought, but you cannot see the thought itself. So where the hell is it? It's this intangible thing that, I don't know. What's really weird is, this is a side note, but how much your body is not you. So when you die, I mean, it's just, this is gone, but whatever we can't see, who the hell knows where that goes? That's so weird. I don't think that can die because we can't touch it. It's not physical. Can it die? We just become a body on the floor? That, I guess, could be, it doesn't work anymore. But I like to think that in that way there's an afterlife. Okay, this is off topic. But I think about the mind-body problem because something is in your body that really influences your actions, and this thing that you got stuck in, that your consciousness got stuck in, is stuck in this physical world, and it influences your mind, and it's just not so easy to make decisions in this conscious world when you have a grounding in this physical world at the same time. And I've been thinking about the way that the past influences the present, and it can affect the future, and because I talked about this in my last video, and I just get nervous about past mistakes that I've made, or not mistakes, past patterns of behavior. Like, I made a video about attachment styles because so much of that comes back to the relationships I would find myself in, or the ones I would seek out, and it's because there was a part of me that was missing an understanding of what is a good one. And I just am afraid of repeating that. I don't want to repeat the past, and it just had me thinking about, in philosophy, in my sophomore year, I took an existentialism class, and there's a theory by Kierkegaard, and essentially it's that you have 3 stages of life, and this has always stuck with me, and there's an aesthetic, an ethical, and a religious, but I don't really see it as religious, and the aesthetic is when you are at the most immature, basic, essentially ignorant level of life that feels good, to do the things that feel good, you know, when you succumb to the acts that give you immediate pleasure. So like when you're an addict, it's that moment where you decide to do the thing that feels so good, even if it's self-destructive. And then you have the second phase, which is the one that I think when I was in that class, it struck all of us. And it resonates with you, and it's that you're aware, you become aware of your choices, you become cognizant of them, which is where cognitive dissonance comes in, because you can become aware of your choices, and you can become aware of what is a better choice, or what would be the good choice or the right choice, but make the one that hurts you, and you go back to this immature stage in your life, or the one that sort of relies on ignorance and solely pleasure. But, sorry, I thought I heard someone knocking on my door, but I don't think they are, and I also have headphones in, so if they're whatever. But when you're in this stage, there's just a constant sense of anxiety. It's a stressful stage to be in, because you're so aware that you are alive, and to be alive comes with responsibility, because you can choose. But you also can't. I mean, I talked about this in my last video too, but so much of your life is what's coming at you. And I know that there's a quote, I don't remember who it's by, but like, so much of life comes at you, but real freedom or something is when you realize that life comes from you. But as much as we can try and choose how to react, and I don't know, choose the way that we understand, and take the external world in and try and use it to our advantage, or not let it crush us at times, you can't control what society or the world throws at you. So when there's systemic issues, you can't just overcome them. I mean, you have this awareness of them, you're cognizant of where you are in the world and your ability to make choices, but you're also so aware of the way that choices have been taken away from you, and the way that you can live your life, and who you can become, and what freedoms you really have in terms of choice. I mean, I feel like I don't even really need to go into that when there's systemic oppression and money, and money especially, or like family obligations, societal obligations. You exist in this space where you become aware of what your actions, or the way your actions can influence those around you, whether or not it's for the good of yourself or for the good of others, the way that you act. And you also become aware of the reality of what allows you to make those choices, and wanting to make the ones that you know are better for you and right, but not always being able to live a fulfilling life, right? Like, there's so much I think we all want to do that would make us happy, but we can't. I mean, we don't live in a world that sort of propagates that existence. You can't just jet off to somewhere that you feel like would make you happier unless you have an abundance of income. And even if you can, it doesn't mean that that's the right choice. I mean, you never really know if you're making the right choice. And that's where the anxiety comes from. And is the right choice something that benefits just you, or benefits the good of society? Are you going to be an egotistical Are you going to base your ethics on your ego, or are you going to base it on utilitarianism? And I will not judge you for either, because it's hard to live in a world where things already hurt and they suck and you have so much weight on your chest all the time, and how much can you consider other people? But at the same time, you should always care about others and how the world affects them, but to what extent can we? What extent can you without sort of just dying or shriveling up and becoming just like the shell of a human being that doesn't have anything left to give? So you're always aware of that balance, and some people throw out the idea of helping others, this utilitarian notion, and just embrace a hedonistic lifestyle, and maybe it's about a balance. And sometimes I like to think, if you embrace egoism as your ethics, that I would love to think that we have a good inherent human nature, that what the good decision, what will make you feel good, altruism, will help the world feel good. But unfortunately, I don't really think that that's the case. And human nature is entirely other separate concept, and so is ethics. But that anxiety stage, and it's also called the ethical stage, is so based in your choices and what path you're going to take ethically. And so many of us sit in this stage and we spend our lives so anxious, and I think aware of the ways that we are unfulfilled, and by choice and not by choice, and how much we can will ourselves to have a more fulfilling life, or to help others, or to help ourselves. And so a lot of us revert back to the aesthetic phase, this indulgent phase, and in different ways. Maybe you're a balancing act and you go from one or the other, and so you make the choice that like hurts you or feels good in the moment but isn't great long term, and then you're back in the anxiety stage the next day, this ethical stage, and you're like, shit. And then you go back and forth. It's a balancing act. And I definitely can think of a lot of ways I struggle with that. It's been, like I said, I'm nervous about repeating past mistakes, or indulging, I don't know, is being aware in this ethical stage of the way that a decision about entering a relationship could affect me negatively, but doing it anyways because that part of my body is like, no, but it feels good, I need what feels good, even though my mind is like, it doesn't. That's not always, like, the book The Body Remembers, I think is what it's called. That's what it talks about. And it's that your body holds on to these things and really affects your choices in a way that needs to be acknowledged. And it's not just that. It could be as simple as, not simple, but as eating, the way you eat, or the way you move your body, or thinking patterns. And I don't know, it can be related to almost all decisions in our life. And being in that ethical stage is so anxiety inducing. But then there's the next stage, which is a religious life. But that just means, to Kierkegaard, it was like putting all faith in God, even though there's no proof that God exists. And so you're kind of embracing the absurd because there's no proof that this exists. But you're embracing it anyways. It's a constant leap of faith to invest in this thing that there's no proof that it is the right thing or that it is even real. But it can just be it's yourself, putting faith entirely in yourself. I don't believe in that religious. So it's putting faith entirely in yourself and like trusting yourself completely, and no longer being driven by the societal expectations in regards to your actions. And like I said, there's only so much that you can do without the external world stopping you. But I guess it's about making your decisions without caring about what the societal obligations are or how people might react, and just, countering those decisions in regards to how realistic the choice is, I guess. What's a better way to word that? Like, you might not be able to make the choice that in theory you think is the right one, like, oh, I want to jet off somewhere, or buy this thing, or I need this thing, or it's not working all the time, right? But taking what you can from that and making the choice that is not what society wants you to make, and making the one that you want to make, and in respect to that. Can't control it. But it's putting faith in yourself completely. And Kierkegaard calls this like a night of faith. This putting faith in yourself completely, acting in faith solely based in yourself. And then there's also, I feel like more people know this, which is Nietzsche's idea that there's an overman and somebody who has the ability to will themselves to act solely according to their values. And it's the way that you define your values, I guess, is both these, the Knight of Faith and the Overman. Your values are no longer defined by societal obligations, they're defined by yourself. And the way you make choices is, your values are innately tied to your choices. So if you're making choices because of society or because of pleasure, you don't really have freedom. You have freedom when you make choices solely based on your values, and that your values have come from yourself. And that's hard to get to. And who's to say that that will cause or lead to a successful life in a culture in general, and in a society, if your decisions are always based out of you. I don't know if you can really get ahead. I mean, a lot of people play this game of life, right, and make the decision that will get them somewhere in society to where they can have the things that maybe make it easier to then make other choices, but then you're always adhering to societal obligations or rules. But like I said, that's not wrong. That's kind of what you have to do. I mean, you have to be able to be successful, to live a comfortable enough life to even consider things like making the choices that are, I guess, solely about what you think is right. And a lot of that comes from how much money you have. But even then, nobody wants to really be an outcast. You want to be othered? I guess it's okay to be othered, depending on the way you are othered. If you're othered because you've done something horrific. But if you're othered because you just want to be you and do the things that you think are right and you're not hurting others, that sucks. Things like sexuality, I mean, you get othered, even though it's not harmful to someone. And so the choice you make in regards to pursuing your sexuality or admitting it really depends on your ability to be okay with the world not liking you or not living up to other people's expectations or values, because you don't fit into their values and you have your own. And that's a hard thing to do, and it can really affect you in life, successfully and socially. And but this is all to be said for maybe less so about choices in regards to everyday life, but choices that we make in the anxiety at the ethical stage that affect us personally and internally and other people. But I'm really not talking about the systemic aspect or the general aspect. I feel like that's an entirely different conversation that deserves its own conversation. I'm just thinking about that ethical stage and the choices that we always go back to, and the way that sometimes we can feel fated to go back to them, and do we have that will to power to not go back to them? Maybe we can never get to this Overman stage or Knight of Faith, which in these theories it's nearly impossible. I don't think they ever think anyone really does. There's Zarathustra by Nietzsche, and it's this man who has reached that stage, and he's talking to the people, and it doesn't make sense to them, and it's just could you become that man? I mean, it's kind of unrealistic. It isn't ideal, so it's not something that when you hear this you should feel I need to get to that. Don't. That's not why this theory is really in place, I don't think. It just is to highlight the hierarchies of humanity and what we experience, being both just a being, a metaphysical being existing in a social world. And my camera turns off at 30 minutes, that's why I keep looking at this. But so what I've been thinking about is this cognitive dissonance that can lead to you making decisions that aren't really the right ones, and repeating past mistakes because of it, even though you've gained an awareness of mentally of the way your choices are affecting you and other people. Sometimes you don't always behave in accordance to it. And there's another theory, it comes from Nietzsche, it's called eternal recurrence, and it's that life is fated because time is cyclical and it'll repeat itself forever in the same way. And fate is already one thing I don't like having a life that is already written. And it can't be changed. You can't change the sentences at all. You can't switch around the words or delete chapters and add new ones. And that's a really harrowing way to perceive existence. But it's also scary to think that time is cyclical in that way and faded, because there's so much more than just you that would then be faded. It puts this idea in place that all of the bad in the world or all of the good will forever be the same. And so the things that we see now in ourselves and in the world around us that are not good, are those doomed to never change, to never really get better, or maybe to never get worse? Which is great, because then you can hold on to the things that are good and be like, well, it can't go away, like, it's always going to repeat. So, but then you see the bad things, and I think it's the bad things that are in my mind, right? I'm like, shit, like, those are the things you don't want to repeat, and so how can you not be more aware of the negative aspects of the world in your existence? And so being stuck in that phase of anxiety or in that stage, I think you become more aware all the time of the choice that could be the wrong one. And is there a wrong one? And you never really know. And so also in Kierkegaard, like, this anxiety stages, the anxiety is being aware of the responsibility of a choice, and that it can grant you sort of freedom, because you can make the choice and define your values and the right one for you, and you can also choose the wrong one and use your freedom wrongfully. I guess when you're aware of your responsibility, you're aware of a sense of freedom to an extent, right? And the wrongful use of it leads to despair. And that's when you're just stuck in this state. Like I guess I'd said before, like, it's a balancing act between, like, an aesthetic stage and making the indulgent, hedonistic decision versus the one that might be using your freedom to benefit you more long-term in this ethical stage. So when you're doing that balancing act, you're constantly shifting between anxiety and despair, and what a difficult way to live, especially when we live in a world that is socially defined, and to be okay in it and to be successful and to live, you need to work that system as best as you can, but then there's also things within the system that don't let you. And that's just hard. That's hard on a worldly system level, on a worldly system level, and that's really hard on an internal, intimate life level. And it's just this constant tug of war, I guess, of what you can do and what you can't do. Okay, I need to restart my camera because it's gonna turn off. Hold on. Anyways, I was thinking about this because, for a lot of reasons, but in college, in this existentialism class, I wrote a paper, and it was sort of talking about, I don't remember what the topic was of the paper, but you had to, like, make a choice and defend it, and I had said that I kind of didn't think you could ever overcome societal obligations or completely define your own values, even though in this class, like, it becomes very clear you really can't. Like, they're kind of telling you in these series you really can't. Like, I'm going to give you this ideal, but it's just so you know that it's just so you kind of know how stuck you are in this social world. And my professor, I went and talked to him, and I was pretty close with him, and I told him, and he was like, that makes me sad for you. And I was like, what? I was like, thank you for that. And then I sent him an email, and I was like, I've had an epiphany. I'm not going to write that anymore. I think you can change, even though that didn't feel right to me. But it was nice to feel hopeful. And I guess right now I wanted to remind myself of that sense of hopefulness. And as this has been a topic I've talked about, I think in the past 2 videos, I think I've been trying to build that sense of hope that just because you've existed in the past, it doesn't mean you're just going to exist that way in the present. And maybe there's philosophical theories that sort of make you feel that way, but it doesn't mean they're right. I don't think they are right. But I think another reason we'll revert to past behaviors, whether they felt good or they felt bad, is because we're bored. And when you're bored, you just do something that stimulates you. So whatever that might be, like I'd said before, all the things that we can become addicted to that just fill our time and, like, make us think about anything other than nothing. And when those are damaging to you, and usually the things that are damaging to you feel good in the moment, you'll just keep going back to them. But then it's repetitive, and the problem is when we repeat things, they get boring again, so then that's not enough. So it's sort of a gateway drug to more potentially self-destructive behavior. Or if you're always living in this, what it could be considered a stage of immaturity and just plain hedonism, it'll always just cause you to revert to and double down on your self-destructive behavior. And being so aware of that and not being able to change it, are not always being able to make the wrong decision. I think you can be so hard on yourself when you make the decision that could hurt you, whether it's long term or in the moment, even though it's so human. That's what is comforting about, I think, philosophy, is that, and these theories in particular, whether or not there's things about them that also are discomforting, is that it reminds me that this is so human and it's not new, and these are things that we have been grappling with forever, and you aren't alone in them. What you have felt, someone else has felt 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago in a different way, or in the exact same way. You're not alone in the way you're experiencing the world. You are, in a way, because it's so individual and personal, but you're not at the same time at all. And that is comforting, I think. I kind of want to say it's both comforting and not comforting, but I can't think of a reason it's not comforting. But maybe it's not always super comforting because we're aware of theories that are sort of sad, I guess. Like, this theory in general is like putting you in this narrative where you're either going to live a life that's sort of not good or isn't fulfilling long term, or you are. And I think it doesn't recognize the balancing act. I think it can kind of make you feel like you are one or the other, even though it's so normal to be on that balance beam of switching from a life where you just sort of indulge in the pleasures, or the ones where you're always making the choice that's about bettering yourself or helping other people. Or maybe there's parts of you that has created your own values, and there's parts of you that can't, for the sake of surviving in a society or a world like this, or because you can't escape socialization, and how much of us is defined by that forever. That was what my paper was about. It was that you couldn't overcome socialization, and that it is impossible for it not to have impacted you. Therefore, it was impossible to ever become an overman, because you'll always be affected and influenced by society. I don't think it's possible to recreate something entirely outside of all that you've known and what has made you. There's something called tabula rasa. It's another theory about human nature, but that it's not about whether or not we were born good or we were born bad. It was like Rousseau thinks we could have been born good, and like Hobbes thinks you're born bad. Like, but is it John Locke? Tabula rasa, whatever. You're born a clean slate, and then you're built up from society. And if that's the case, if you're born a clean slate, you are a product of society, and you can never escape it. And so, I don't know why I started talking about that, but yeah, I guess it's oh yeah, that's why it's discomforting, is because you're always going to be a product of society. And even if we are sharing that experience and you're not alone in it, it's also unnerving to know that this is the experience we've always shared and nobody has overcome it. And I think if you do think you did, or you're sort of fooling yourself, and then you're not living in reality, and you don't benefit from living in a delusion like that where you've overcome and outdone society, like you know more than them. You don't. There's nothing else you know other than what they've told you. But we have the ability to be introspective, and we do have this mind, this intangible mind that exists outside of us. So maybe in some ways we can, because that's not rooted in the physical world, even though its roots quite literally are in the physical world to interact with it as a physical body. I don't know. There's so much. You'll never have an answer. There is no answer for these things, and that's why I love philosophy, and why I studied it, is because I've never understood having one answer. I have understood asking a million questions, and everything being open-ended, because sometimes if you're given an answer, it can suck, but then in philosophy there's always the opportunity to say the other thing, and for something to be good, or bearable, and you don't just have one fate. It's impossible. You can't have one fate if there's a million different interpretations or written fates, apparently, and no one's been able to exactly say what that fate is, or be able to write it and tell you this exactly what it is. Like, life is so individual, and so there really can't be one fate. I think I just started getting off topic, but it's okay, I guess, to know that you are a product of society, but to embrace the parts of you that exist outside of it, and that you can sit and go into yourself and realize, yeah, I've been told this my whole life, or this is what things have always been, and maybe this is what I've experienced and done in the past, but I do exist as a person outside of these things, and I can make choices and define some of my values based solely on what I can find inside of myself. Because there's a whole world inside of you alone, and it's just interacting with the world outside of you, and it can't not be influenced by these things, and you can't not act without respect to these things, but you can think independently of them as much as possible. Like I said, you're always going to be influenced by it, and your thinking will be to an extent, but there's also, like I said, a whole world inside of you that is your own and can think outside of this, I think. And so you're not a complete slave to what you've been raised in, and no one can take away that consciousness. No one can take away that intangible thing. They literally cannot rip it from you and throw it into a shredder. They can try and manipulate it in their favor, but they cannot take it away from you. So I think embracing the times where you are completely alone in silence and recounting the things that have happened to you, and the times you've acted sort of out of just physical pleasures or solely out of societal obligations, and taking them into and reconciling them with the part of you that exists outside of this and can reason about why you acted that way beyond what you've been told, and sort of sit in that self-awareness. But self-awareness can be despairing and anxiety-inducing, right? Because you become aware of what you can't control, or the way that you also are just an amalgamation of other people and cultures and society, and rather than an individual self, we're just a collection of both. We are both an independent self and a society, and we mesh into one, but we are one individually, and then we are also part of a one wholly. And that's a weird balancing act of existence that's always going to be at odds with each other. And sometimes I think they work harmoniously, and other times they don't. Maybe we can't live a life of complete harmony, and maybe that's okay. Maybe life would be really boring. Like before, boredom leads to repetition, and repetition leads to gateway to things that really you can't do a gateway of always things that are good for you. Everything that's not in moderation isn't good for you. It's self-destructive in some way or another. So, you are so much more than what the world has told you are, and you do have freedom and choices, but you can't beat yourself up for making the choice that maybe feels wrong, or making the choice that feels wrong but you know is the right one to society, that will make life more livable in this world. It's unfortunate that we live in a world that you have to cast yourself aside and your values and sometimes your voice to just find some success that lets you then take advantage of some freedom, because without these basic needs being met, which comes from embracing and doing what society sort of tells you to do, you can't have any freedom. There is no freedom. You don't even have time to consider the anxiety. That's a privilege in itself, and it's not even one that feels good, but it is a privilege to sit in this ethical stage. Is quite literally a privilege, and it just, I hate that thought. But it's a privilege. And I guess it's just important to always hold on to the part of you that knows that you are more than it, and that it's wrong, usually. Or sometimes it's right, but that it's wrong and you know it's wrong. And so if you can know that what society is telling you is not something you really want to do, hold on to the part of yourself that knows that, because that's you. That is you, and that is you coming through, and that is the you that exists outside of what we've always been told. That's proof that we are not just a complete product of socialization, and that we do have some power to overcome it. And like I said, it's a balancing act of working the two together to live as best a life as possible. And, there's whole other conversations to be had about systemic oppressive systems, but in terms, I guess, of an eternal world and the way we interact with all of those things. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've probably talked a little bit too much, but that's all I really have to say. And I guess I'll just say one last thing, which is that if you have any thoughts on this at all, or on anything else, the website will be linked down below, and there's a submissions page, and I would love to see it or hear it, or there's different ways you can submit, whether it's like a written thing or a video or even a voice recording or pictures, and anyone's watching this that watches these, but I would love to see it and to hear your thoughts and to hear your experiences and maybe get to see a glimpse of what that little voices of yours and your internal world outside of everything else we hear, and outside of my own. It's comforting to hear someone else's, and to let those two interact. And I also write some academic papers on there, if you want to check those out. And I write personal ones. I have a piece that I just wrote that's sort of talking about this. There's a couple that kind of talk about this, which will also be linked down below. And yeah, that's all I have to say. And I'll just say it one more time, even though I've repeated it a million times. Repetition. Maybe it'll get boring to hear this. But you are so much more than what the world has made you out to be. Or you are so much more than what the world tells you to be and what it wants to make you. And you know that. Because if you're watching this and you can relate to anything, you know that. Because you're having thoughts about this. Okay. Bye.